RenderDoc, the GPU profiler Unity should have built. Hello and welcome to episode number 14 of the Unity Performance Task Force podcast. I'm your host, Ruben from TheGameDev.Guru, and as usual, I'll kick things off with a question for you. Have you ever stared at Unity's GPU profiler, seen that a draw call is expensive, and thought to yourself, okay, but why? What's actually happening on the GPU? Unity gives you timing data. It tells you how long things take, but it doesn't show you the why. It doesn't show you the textures being used. It doesn't show you the GPU state. It doesn't let you visualize overdraw or inspect shader complexity in detail. That's the gap RenderDoc fills. Today we're talking about RenderDoc, a standalone GPU profiling tool that's honestly better than most of what Unity ships with. And the best part? It's free, cross-platform, and it works with any graphics API Unity supports, including Vulkan, DirectX, and OpenGL. So what is RenderDoc and why should you care? Let me take you back to the P3 optimization framework I've mentioned before. Profile, plan, perform. 3 steps you repeat until you hit your target frame rate. The profile step is all about answering 2 questions. First, who is slowing you down? Second, why is that the case? Unity's profiler helps with the first question. It tells you which systems are taking time: rendering, physics, scripts, audio, and if you dig into the GPU profiler, it even tells you which draw calls are expensive. But when it comes to the why, Unity starts to fall short. That's where RenderDoc comes in. RenderDoc is a GPU profiling tool. It captures a single frame of your game, then lets you dissect every draw call in that frame. And I mean everything. The meshes, the transforms, the textures used as input, the textures generated as output, the GPU state at that exact moment, even the shader code. And here's the kicker. You can edit shaders on the fly and see the results immediately. No recompiling, no relaunching, just tweak and test. This is insanely useful when you're trying to understand why a draw call is expensive. Maybe it's the shader complexity. Maybe it's the texture resolution. Maybe it's the GPU state causing unnecessary work. RenderDoc shows you all of this. Now, RenderDoc works on a lot of platforms: Windows, Linux, Android, even Stadia and Nintendo Switch. If you're on Mac, you're out of luck. But if you're on Windows, you've got about 90% of everything covered. So what kind of information does RenderDoc give you? First, mesh information. For every draw call, RenderDoc shows you the mesh being rendered. You can visualize the geometry, see the vertex count, inspect the transforms applied to each vertex. This is huge when you're debugging why a mesh looks wrong or why it's more expensive than expected. Second, texture information. RenderDoc shows you which textures are being used as inputs for a draw call: albedo, normal maps, specular maps, whatever. It also shows you the output textures: the frame buffer, render targets, shadow maps. Unity doesn't show you this, at least not easily. RenderDoc makes it trivial. Third, shader complexity. RenderDoc lets you inspect the disassembled shader code. You can see how many instructions the shader has. You can identify expensive operations. And like I said, you can edit the shader on the fly to test performance changes. This is perfect when you're trying to figure out if a shader is your bottleneck. Fourth, GPU state. Unity abstracts everything into materials. That's convenient for game development, but the GPU doesn't understand materials. The GPU understands state, blending modes, depth testing, stencil operations, culling modes. RenderDoc shows you the raw GPU state for every draw call. Over time, this teaches you how the GPU actually works. And that knowledge makes you a better developer. Fifth, GPU render time. RenderDoc gives you an estimation of how long each draw call takes on the GPU. It's not perfectly accurate, but it's good enough to identify hotspots. Unity's GPU profiler can do this too, but RenderDoc's interface is cleaner. I personally prefer it. Sixth, overdraw visualization. RenderDoc can show you how many times each pixel is drawn. This is critical on mobile devices, where memory bandwidth is often your biggest bottleneck. If a pixel is being drawn 5 times, you're wasting GPU power. RenderDoc makes this obvious. Seventh, depth and stencil visualization. You can check if depth testing is working correctly. You can see stencil buffer contents. This helps you debug rendering issues and optimize draw call order. So that's what RenderDoc gives you. Now let's talk about how to use it. First, install RenderDoc. I'm not going to walk you through the installation because it's straightforward. Download, install, done. Second, launch your Unity project. You can profile either the editor or a standalone build. If you're profiling a build, just run your game like normal. Third, open RenderDoc and attach it to your target. If you're profiling the Unity editor, you attach to the editor process. If you're profiling a build, you attach to that executable. Unity even makes this easier. In the editor, you'll find buttons that launch RenderDoc and attach it automatically. Super convenient. Fourth, play your game until you reach the frame you want to profile. Maybe it's a specific camera angle. Maybe it's a moment when performance drops. Doesn't matter. Just get to that frame. Fifth, capture a snapshot. In RenderDoc, hit F12 or click the capture button. RenderDoc grabs every single draw call, texture, mesh, and piece of GPU state from that frame. Sixth, save the capture. This is important. When you save a capture, RenderDoc writes everything to a file. You can reload that file later, even if the game isn't running. This lets you compare frames over time. It lets you share captures with teammates. It's incredibly useful. Finally, analyze the capture. This is where the real work happens. You scroll through the draw calls, you inspect textures, you check the GPU state, you look for overdraw, you identify bottlenecks. This is the fun part, the detective work. Now let me walk you through a typical RenderDoc workflow. You open RenderDoc, you attach it to Unity, you capture a frame. Now you're looking at a list of draw calls. Maybe there are 500 of them, maybe 2000, depends on your scene. First thing you do, look at the texture viewer. This shows you what's being rendered at each step. You can scrub through the draw calls and watch the scene being built up piece by piece. This is incredibly satisfying, by the way. You see a blank screen, then the skybox appears, then the terrain, then the characters, then the UI. It's like watching your game being painted in real time. Second, check the overlay modes. RenderDoc can visualize overdraw. It colors pixels based on how many times they've been drawn. If you see a lot of red, you have overdraw problems. On mobile, this is a huge deal. Overdraw means you're wasting memory bandwidth. And on tile-based GPUs like the ones in phones and Quest headsets, bandwidth is everything. Third, inspect individual draw calls. Click on a draw call. RenderDoc shows you the mesh, the input textures, the output textures, the GPU state, and the shader code. Let's say you find a draw call that's taking 2 milliseconds. That's expensive. You inspect the shader. It's got 500 instructions. That's a lot. Maybe you can simplify it. Or maybe the issue isn't the shader. Maybe it's the texture resolution. You see the albedo map is 4K. Do you really need 4K for that object? Probably not. Drop it to 2K. Test again. This is the kind of analysis Unity's profiler can't give you. Fourth, check the pipeline state. RenderDoc shows you every piece of GPU state for a draw call. Blending mode, depth testing, stencil operations, culling mode, all of it. Sometimes you'll find that a draw call is expensive because of unnecessary state changes. Maybe you're enabling alpha blending when you don't need it. Maybe you're doing depth writes when you could skip them. RenderDoc makes this visible. Fifth, use the GPU timeline. RenderDoc can show you how long each draw call takes. It's not perfectly accurate because GPU timing is tricky, but it's good enough to identify hotspots. If you see one draw call taking 5 times longer than the others, that's your target. That's where you focus your optimization efforts. So when should you use RenderDoc? Use RenderDoc when Unity's profiler isn't giving you enough information, when you know the GPU is your bottleneck but you don't know why. Use it when you need to understand texture usage. Unity doesn't show you which textures are being used for each draw call. RenderDoc does. Use it when you need to debug shaders. RenderDoc lets you inspect shader code, edit it on the fly, and see the results immediately. Use it when you need to visualize overdraw. This is especially important on mobile. Use it when you're trying to understand the GPU pipeline. Seeing the raw GPU state teaches you how graphics APIs work, and that knowledge makes you a better developer. This is exactly the kind of workflow we use at TheGameDev.Guru when teams are stuck on GPU bottlenecks. We capture frames in RenderDoc, identify the expensive draw calls, inspect the textures and shaders, and figure out what's causing the slowdown. Usually takes a couple of hours, and we find the problem. Now let's talk about when you shouldn't use RenderDoc. Don't use RenderDoc if your bottleneck is on the CPU. RenderDoc is a GPU tool. If your performance problem is in scripts, physics, or animation, Unity's profiler is a better fit. Don't use RenderDoc if you're just starting with profiling. RenderDoc is powerful, but it's also complex. If you're new to performance optimization, start with Unity's profiler first. Get comfortable with that, then move to RenderDoc when you need deeper visibility. Don't use RenderDoc if you're on Mac. It doesn't support Metal, you're stuck with Xcode's GPU tools, which are fine but not as flexible. And don't use RenderDoc for every frame. RenderDoc captures are expensive. They take time, they generate large files. You only capture when you've identified a problem and need to dig deeper. Now there's one more thing I want to mention. RenderDoc teaches you how the GPU works. Okay? When you use Unity's profiler, everything is abstracted. Materials, draw calls, batches. These are Unity concepts. They're useful, but they hide what's actually happening on the hardware. RenderDoc shows you the raw GPU state, blending modes, depth functions, stencil operations. This is what the GPU actually sees. Over time, this teaches you to think like the GPU. And when you think like the GPU, you make better decisions. You write better shaders. You structure your draw calls more efficiently. You avoid expensive state changes. This knowledge compounds. Every hour you spend in RenderDoc makes you a better graphics programmer. Let me give you a quick example. Let's say you're rendering a scene with transparent objects. You profile in Unity and see that the transparent pass is taking 10 milliseconds. That's a lot. You open RenderDoc. You capture a frame. You inspect the transparent draw calls. First thing you notice, the objects are being drawn in the wrong order. Transparent objects should be sorted back to front for correct blending, but in your capture they're all over the place. Second thing, you see that every transparent draw call is writing to the depth buffer. That's usually unnecessary for transparent objects. Depth writes are expensive. Third thing, you notice the shader is using a complex blending mode. You check the GPU state. It's set to a custom blend function that requires multiple passes. You didn't need RenderDoc to tell you the transparent pass was slow. Unity's profiler already told you that. But RenderDoc told you why. And that's what lets you fix it. You disable depth rights for transparent objects. You simplify the blending mode. You sort the objects correctly. You test again. The transparent pass now takes 4 milliseconds instead of 10. That's the power of RenderDoc. It turns vague performance problems into specific, actionable fixes. Let me recap the 3 big takeaways. 1. RenderDoc is a free, cross-platform GPU profiling tool that shows you what Unity's profiler can't. Textures, GPU state, shader complexity, overdraw, all of it. 2. Use RenderDoc when you know the GPU is your bottleneck but you don't know why. Capture a frame, inspect the draw calls, identify the problem. 3. RenderDoc teaches you how the GPU actually works. Over time, this knowledge makes you a better graphics programmer and helps you make smarter optimization decisions. If you found this podcast episode useful, you can access in-depth lessons in the Unity Performance Task Force program at www.performancetaskforce.com. And if Unity Consulting is what you are after, book a free discovery call at https://consulting.thegamedev.guru. Till next time.